Some animated films go far beyond talking animals or musical numbers. These are the ones that got banned, censored, or quietly buried because they went too hard, whether through gore, sex, psychological collapse, or sheer visual overload. The kind of movies that left viewers wondering how they were ever allowed to exist. The first one on the list was banned decades after release for being too disturbing, long after it had already reshaped global pop culture. Akira begins with an explosion, not a nuclear bomb, but something worse, something psychic. Tokyo is destroyed, and by 2019 the city is rebuilt as Neo-Tokyo, a sprawling, corrupt dystopia riddled with violence, riots, and military control. At the center of it all is Kaneda, the cocky leader of a biker gang, and his childhood friend Tetsuo, who crashes his bike during a street battle and is taken away by a shadowy government agency. What follows is a slow, terrifying unraveling. Tetsuo develops telekinetic powers and loses control, plagued by hallucinations, rage, and an overwhelming need to prove he's not weak. Meanwhile, the government hides a project called Akira, an experiment so powerful it erased the original Tokyo. The truth is buried in test chambers, mutilated children, and the silent remains of a godlike child kept frozen underground. The animation was so complex that the team invented new technology to handle the detail. Lip movements were synced to voice recordings, an unheard of method in anime at the time, and every frame was hand-drawn in meticulous, fluid detail, totaling over 160,000 individual cells. Akira didn't just raise the bar, it redrew it. In one scene, Tetsuo's body mutates into a grotesque mass of flesh, wires, and screaming limbs, a moment that took months to animate and still disturbs viewers decades later. The film was a massive gamble. Katsuhiro Otomo, the creator of the original manga, insisted on directing it himself, even though the manga wasn't finished. He condensed thousands of pages of story into a 2-hour collapse of sanity, violence, and existential dread. Western distributors had no idea how to market it. Some theaters played it late at night, expecting stoner crowds. Instead, they got stunned silence. The film didn't explain itself. It didn't have to. Akira was never about answers. It was about power, memory, and the fear that maybe we're not ready for either. Perfect Blue begins with a pop idol waving to a crowd that already feels like it owns her. Mima Kirigo is young, adored, and about to make a leap from innocent singer to serious actress. That's where things start to unravel. Her fans don't want her to change, her managers argue over her future, and Mima starts losing track of what's real. She sees herself on TV, hears her own voice talking back, and stares into mirrors that lie. When a brutal murder happens on set, Mima thinks she might be responsible, or maybe someone else wants her to think that. The film keeps folding in on itself until even Mima can't tell if she's acting or confessing. What makes it hit so hard isn't just the violence or confusion, it's the calm, unraveling way it happens. Director Satoshi Kon started out with a much smaller project. It was supposed to be a low-budget direct-to-video release, but when the production got more funding, Kon rewrote everything, turning a basic thriller into something more psychological, layered, and deeply unsettling. He wasn't interested in jump scares. He wanted to explore identity collapse and the cost of performance. One scene in particular became infamous, a fictional rape filmed for Mima's TV role. Kon later said he regretted how graphic it was on the big screen, calling it too much. But the censors in Japan didn't see it that way. They gave the movie an R15 rating, much lower than expected. That decision sparked outrage and confusion. Critics questioned why something so explicit was deemed acceptable for teens. The backlash only fueled the film's reputation. Even years later, Perfect Blue isn't just a psychological thriller. It's a cautionary tale about fame, obsession, and how media can turn a person into a ghost of themselves. Kite begins with the kind of image that sticks with you. An office worker explodes from the inside as a bullet rips through his chest, and standing there without blinking is a teenage girl in a red school uniform clutching a gun. Her name is Sawa, and by the time you realize she's the protagonist, the film has already blurred the line between victim and weapon. She's an orphan trained to kill by the same detectives who murdered her parents. The story drags her through alleyways and hotel rooms, each assignment carried out with cold precision and dead eyes. But what sets Kite apart isn't just the ultra-violence, it's what happens between the gunshots. The film implies, and in some versions shows, that Sawa is being sexually abused by her guardian, a dynamic that made Kite one of the most banned anime films of the 1990s. In the uncut Japanese version, the abuse is explicit and unflinching. In many international releases, those scenes were removed entirely, not just censored, but erased, with entire plot threads stitched back together to make the film look like a simple revenge story. It wasn't. Director Yasuomi Umetsu claimed the abuse was never for shock. It was about control, about systems that consume girls and spit out killers. But some animators disagreed with the vision and reportedly walked off the project, rather than animate those sequences. Even so, Kite spread underground. Fans passed around bootlegs at conventions, and forums debated whether the film was a brutal work of protest or just exploitation with a glossy finish. The controversy became the point. By the time a live-action remake arrived in 2014, it had been stripped of nearly everything that gave the original its bite. No abuse, no subtext, just action. And that quiet erasure might be more disturbing than anything in the film itself. Ninja Scroll doesn't waste time. It opens with an entire village reduced to corpses, and a swordsman walking through it like a ghost. His name is Jubei, a wandering warrior with no master and no interest in saving anyone. That changes fast. After rescuing a poisoned kunoichi named Kagero and killing a man made of stone, Jubei finds himself caught in a web of violence involving 8 supernatural assassins, a corrupt shogunate, and a plague conspiracy designed to destabilize Japan. The enemies are grotesque, each with a bizarre power. One has wasps nesting in his back, another seduces with poison, another uses string to flay people alive. But what hits harder than the gore is how personal the violence gets. Kagero is immune to all toxins, but her body is used as bait, as weapon, as punishment. Her assault scene was controversial even on release, and some broadcasters censored it entirely. Director Yoshiaki Kawajiri insisted it wasn't meant to titillate. He called it a necessary evil to show how cruel that world was, but others argued it crossed a line, reducing trauma to stylized pain. Despite that, Ninja Scroll became a defining title in the West's first wave of adult anime. It aired late at night on cable, often edited beyond recognition, with fans hunting down uncut versions on VHS. The animation was done almost entirely by hand in an era where budgets were tight and deadlines brutal. Studio Madhouse animators worked around the clock, often sleeping in the office. Years later, Kawajiri would say he didn't expect it to blow up. But it did, becoming a gateway drug for anime fans who came for the sword fights and stayed for the horror, the betrayal, and the quiet, sad ending that leaves Jubei exactly where he started, alone and walking away. Heavy Metal came out in 1981 and somehow still feels like it shouldn't exist. It's not a film in the usual sense, it's an anthology, stitched together with rock music, gore, and sex, and tied to a glowing green orb called the Loch-Nar that corrupts everything it touches. Each segment takes place in a different world: a flying taxi in dystopian New York, a zombie war in Deptuaya, a courtroom in space, and a warrior woman who rides a bird across molten landscapes. The animation shifts constantly. Some scenes are painted like oil canvases, others rotoscoped from live action. The tone is all over the place. One minute you're watching a stoner astronaut get vaporized. The next you're in a softcore fantasy sequence where a secretary becomes a naked space queen. That tone was exactly what the creators wanted. Heavy Metal was born from the French magazine Metal Hurlant, a surreal adult sci-fi comic that blended sex, violence, and philosophy. Producer Ivan Reitman brought together animators from multiple studios, each working independently. Some of them had never done animation before. John Candy voiced multiple characters, the band Black Sabbath submitted a song, Columbia Pictures panicked halfway through and tried to censor certain scenes, especially one involving a topless teenager on a spaceship. They lost. The film was released uncut and instantly sparked protests. For years, it couldn't be properly re-released due to music rights issues that only made its legend grow. Fans passed around grainy bootlegs, and by the time the rights were cleared in the 90s, it had become cult canon. Today, it's messy, dated, and often absurd. But it's also unforgettable, not because it's perfect, but because nothing else dares to be that chaotic, horny, and cosmic all at once. Fist of the North Star is a post-apocalyptic blood opera, where men explode just from being touched. The film follows Kenshiro, a lone martial artist walking through a desert wasteland after a nuclear war has reduced civilization to rubble. He practices Hokuto Shinken, a deadly technique that targets pressure points and causes enemies to die from the inside out. He's searching for his kidnapped fiancée, Yuria, and confronting his former friend turned warlord, Shin, who betrayed him. The plot is simple: revenge, rescue, repeat. But the violence is anything but. Heads detonate, bodies inflate and burst, limbs twist in impossible ways before shattering like glass. Censors in Japan trimmed scenes for theatrical release, but fans quickly found the uncut versions through home video. In the West, it became infamous for being the anime where people explode. What most viewers didn't know was that the animators struggled under the weight of their own ambition. The studio Toei Animation pushed for a cinematic scope, detailed backgrounds, fluid motion, elaborate gore, but they were also dealing with one of the tightest schedules of any anime film that year. Entire scenes had to be redrawn in the final days before release, with junior animators brought in just to color blood. Kenshiro's design changed slightly across sequences, not for stylistic reasons, but because multiple teams were animating simultaneously and didn't have time to compare notes. The film was adapted from a wildly successful manga, and expectations were brutal. Even the sound design, punches like meat slaps, screams that echo forever, was mixed over multiple all-nighters. Decades later, people still quote the same line, "You're already dead." But what makes Fist of the North Star linger isn't just the carnage. It's the fact that every single death, no matter how absurd, feels like part of some operatic tragedy where masculinity, pain, and honor are inseparable. Golgo 13, the professional, begins with a sniper shot to the forehead, clean, silent, and perfectly timed. That's the kind of killer Duke Togo is. known only by his codename. Golgo 13 is a professional assassin with no allegiance, no emotion, and no visible weaknesses. In the film, he's hired to take out the son of a powerful oil magnate, which he does in the opening minutes. The rest of the story is fallout. The magnate unleashes every tool he has: FBI agents, CIA black ops, military hardware, even a genetically engineered super killer, all to kill the man who dared touch his bloodline. Golgo moves through it all like a ghost. He doesn't speak unless it's necessary. He doesn't panic. He doesn't miss. The film was one of the first anime features to use 3D computer graphics, and it shows in awkward helicopter shots and jagged buildings that haven't aged well. But what has aged is the mood: cold, brutal, and deeply nihilistic. The animation style is gritty, the action unrelenting, and the sex scenes, because there are many, are mechanical and unsettling. In Japan, Golgo 13 was already a cultural icon, a manga character with hundreds of kills under his belt, but the film pushed boundaries, especially overseas. Some versions were heavily edited, cutting entire scenes involving implied sexual violence and stripping down the bleakest moments. In the original cut, women are disposable, morality doesn't exist, and revenge is just another job. Voice actor Tetsuro Sagawa recorded most of Golgo's dialogue in near monotone, on purpose. The director told him, "No emotion, no hesitation, just inevitability." The result is a film that feels less like a thriller and more like a contract signed in blood, paid in silence, and already completed by the time the credits roll. Fire and Ice opens with a glacier swallowing the world. Not metaphorically, an actual wall of ice pushed forward by the will of Necron, a sadistic sorcerer who controls it with his mind. His enemies live in Firekeep, a kingdom powered by molten lava, ruled by a noble king and his barely clothed daughter Tigra. When Necron's ape-like warriors kidnap her, it sets off a rescue mission involving a lone survivor named Larn and a silent masked fighter known only as Darkwolf. The plot is pure sword and sorcery fantasy, good versus evil, fire versus ice, and lots of muscle-bound warriors fighting over a half-naked princess. But what gave the film its strange longevity wasn't the story. It was the collaboration. Ralph Bakshi directed it, Frank Frazetta designed it. Together they built an animated world entirely rotoscoped, filmed in live action first, then drawn over frame by frame to give every movement a surreal, dreamlike intensity. The technique was meant to bring Frazetta's paintings to life. It also helped with the budget, which was tight enough that some scenes were reused or altered mid-production to cut costs. Most of the backgrounds were painted by hand, with details so dense the camera could barely move without breaking the illusion. Critics were split. Some admired the style, others thought it looked like a moving slideshow. But the most debated part was Tigra. Her design was pure Frazetta: long hair, impossibly smooth skin, a bikini made of strings. Voice actress Maggie Roswell wasn't told how revealing the character would be until after the animation was complete. In later interviews, she said she wouldn't have done the role if she'd known. Over time, the film gained cult status, especially among fans of fantasy art. It became a late-night favorite, passed around on VHS, cited as an influence by animators and comic artists alike. The original reels now sit in archives, occasionally pulled for restoration, but the film itself remains what it always was: a painted fever dream of violence, heat, and bodies that never stop posing.